Together we learn, together we grow, together we heal, together we flow. Be cool, every teacher, every school. 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 Be cool, every teacher. Together we learn, together we grow, together we heal, together we flow. Be cool, every teacher, every school.
Testing.
Be cool, every teacher, every school.
Good evening, everybody. My name is Todd Scholl. I serve as the lead learner for the SCEA Center for Educator Wellness and Learning. Sorry, we had a little bit of technical difficulties there transitioning from that graphic to our live stream, but hopefully everything's all set now. If you are interested in learning more about our Center for Educator Wellness and Learning, you can go to our website right here at cool.us, that's CEWL.us. There you can learn about everything we are doing to try to improve the inner and outer lives of educators here in South Carolina. And we are proud to be affiliated with the South Carolina Education Association and on a GPS grant from the National Education Association. Of course, the SCEA is the state affiliate of NEA. And if you are interested in joining that organization, you can do so right here at jointhescea.org. Well, we are gearing up. It's now 2026. Happy New Year, everybody. And we are gearing up for another election coming up in November. I know it seems like we just had one, but it's an important state election coming up. And one of the positions, of course, that affects educators is the Superintendent of Education. And we had Sylvia Wright on a few weeks ago. And tonight we are going to have a familiar face on. Her name is Lisa Ellis. Many of you know Lisa from when she ran for Superintendent of Education back in 2022. She is running again. And before we bring her on, I'm just going to tell you a little bit about her. She has a Bachelor of Arts in English from the College of Charleston and a Master of Science in Forest Resource Management from Clemson University. She began teaching at Ridgeview High School in 2001. During her educational career, she's taught English leadership. She's been a director of student activities and an instructional coach in 4 schools, 3 school districts. She's in her 25th year of education as the student activities director at Blythewood High School in Richland 2. She's also an adjunct professor at the College of Charleston in their education department. And in 2018, she received a Master of Arts in Organizational Leadership from Columbia College. Through this program, she's recognized the importance of using her voice to affect change. She created the SC for Ed Facebook closed group as a community for South Carolina educators to become a collective voice. And the SC for Ed evolved into a grassroots movement to implement effective changes in public education in South Carolina. The mission of SC for Ed was to place an extraordinary teacher in every classroom. In 2022, Lisa decided to elevate her voice even further by running for state superintendent of education of South Carolina. While not successful, she continues to advocate for the profession while working at Blythewood. Lisa hopes that others will realize the power of their voice and fight for this wonderful profession. More importantly, she hopes those who have the power to affect change will listen to teachers and choose what is best for children in South Carolina. So, without further ado, let's bring on Lisa Ellis. How are you tonight, Lisa?
I'm great, Todd. Thanks for having me on. I'm looking forward to the conversation.
Yeah. Did you have a good holiday season and a nice break?
It was very nice. It was spent with friends and family, and just the ability to just stop and breathe and rest and do what I wanted to do when I wanted to do it. It's always nice as a teacher.
Yeah. Let's go. Let's first of all, you heard me read your bio. Is there anything you'd like to share with folks who may be watching that wasn't included in your bio? Anything else you'd like to share about your history, background?
I think that you hit all of the key points of it. I think what's important to know about me is that I'm still in schools, still dealing with students and teachers every day. I love the job. I love working with students, but I continue to see teachers leaving, students being sort of given the short stick, and it continues to break my heart, which is why we're back here having this conversation, and my hat is back in the ring to run for office.
Yeah. So, when you started SC for Ed, let's kind of go back to that point because I think that was a really important point in your leadership journey, and a really an important point for South Carolina educators in terms of starting to realize what could happen if we actually all kind of got together. Can you talk a little bit more about the formation of SC for Ed, what that was about, what you hoped would happen, and then maybe some of the things you were surprised by as it continued to evolve and grow?
Yeah, honestly, when you think about teaching, I tell people that you're surrounded by people all day, and yet it's still a very isolating profession because you are inside a classroom, with a group of students, depending on the age, but no other adults, for that time period. And so, really, SC for Ed started as a closed Facebook group because I just felt like I was drowning alone, and that was if you scroll all the way back down to the original post, it was, is anybody else feel alone and like they're drowning in this profession? And sent it out to about 40 teacher friends that I've met over the time, and it just sort of blew up from there. And so it really originally started out just to be a community for teachers, to be able to have a space to share ideas, to share grievances, to say, oh, you too, well, that makes me feel better that I don't feel so alone. And what we realized was happening is that we weren't alone in some of the issues that we were having to deal with. And so that as we started talking to each other, we realized, oh, you're having the same problems. You're not in my school. You're in a different district. You're in a different part of the state. These must be systemic problems. And okay, now, as teachers, we're natural problem solvers. We solve problems all day, every day with our students, with our schools. And so it sort of turned into okay, how can we work to affect these problems and fix them systemically? And so that's sort of where it evolved into that grassroots movement of trying to elevate the teacher voice, to be heard. So those systems that are broken and that are ultimately hurting students, because they're hurting teachers, could be fixed. And you want to talk about a learning experience and a trial by fire and a, hey, you don't know what you don't know sort of thing. It was a lot.
Yeah.
And at the same time, those people who I Jedi mind tricked or warped into this, brought into this movement with me, we were all still teaching full time. And so what we realized was I shouldn't say the people, I should say there were people who had the ability to affect change, either were choosing not to or didn't know what changes need to be made. And so that's sort of where it came out, into, a movement to get teachers speaking up and to get teachers to understand the value of their voice, because I think for a lot of years that teacher voice was silenced, either through exhaustion, either through more and more things being put on teachers' plates, all of that. And so that was always the goal, is for teachers to understand the power of their voice and to use it to affect change in their school, in their district, and then ultimately in South Carolina.
Yeah, it feels like you tapped into something. Yeah, it was like the right time and the right thing at the right time, where a lot of educators were feeling a certain way. And you started with that group of 40, and then it just kind of seemed to mushroom almost overnight into
Mhm.
thousands of people connecting to SC for Ed. And then, of course, culminating in that May 1st, 2019 event. And I'm on my way there. I invited an educator friend of mine, and we thought there'll be a few hundred people here. And then you get there, and it's and you look around, and it's just the streets are lined with people. The state house grounds are just overflowing with people. What did that moment, May 1st, feel like for you, as the person who sort of spearheaded that movement?
It's still, we still talk about it, to this day, and really, leading up to it, again, we were in the same boat. We knew that we needed to do some sort of action, and didn't really know the expectations. But again, as teachers, start with step one and step two and step three. And as we realized, and we had sort of an RSVP, or let us know whether you're coming, because we wanted to be in communication with the state house grounds, with local law enforcement. We wanted to make sure, that it was a safe event, for everyone at the time. And then as we realized that it started getting into the thousands, we still joke about, like, that Monday trying to find porta potties for people to sit there and be able to access. Um, I mean, truly had no idea. And what I found, I had to sort of, part of it is you're making sure that everything's running, that everybody's, own time, that has access to the microphone to speak and do all of that part of the program. Um, and I think sort of while others were speaking and I was sort of looking around, it was just something that I had never experienced
Yeah.
before, in terms of seeing, and it gave me such hope. It gave me, I was like, oh, this is it. This is what is going to change everything. And then you don't really see the crowds until later in the day, and you see the news footage and you realize sort of how big it actually was. And then you hear about the snipers on the roof, like all of these things that we probably didn't know, which was good in the time.
Right.
But it just was, and the fact that everybody was supportive and cheering and together. And we heard stories about teachers saying they didn't realize that anybody else from their school was coming, and then they saw people from their
Yeah.
school. And so it created sort of those relationships to, again, then now you're not the only one in your building that wants things to be better. And
Right.
I mean, it still, I look back and I still think, wow, we did that. And then I think, of course we did. We're teachers. That's what teachers do, right? We find problems and we work to solve them. And I really, that day, I just knew things were going to get better. Just
Yeah.
just knew it. I knew that impact was going to just wake people up and say, you can't sit there and wait any longer. You've got to make these changes now.
Yeah, I mean, I remember being there, and similarly feeling just this incredible hope, and realizing, "Oh, okay, there is the potential to do collective action." Like,
Yeah.
there's thousands of people here, And there's probably thousands more that wanted to come, but for whatever reason couldn't get a babysitter, or for whatever reason couldn't make it. Um, and so you felt like, okay, we're all kind of getting on a similar page, at least a similar page here. And then, of course, you continued that sort of advocacy, but we had the complication of COVID, which really changed everything. It feels like there was momentum building, and then COVID hits, and then everybody's focus is on let's just surviving that. Can you talk a little bit about, as we transitioned to COVID, what was going on with SC for Ed, and kind of as it was moving forward, what you saw from your vantage point with advocacy in South Carolina?
Yeah, COVID, it really, it's hard to really look back and think about, wow, God, that was something, right? You look back and you think about what you know now, but it was a crazy time, and we actually were one of the first, because we had another a planned event at the State House, and we ended up canceling it because of the COVID concerns, and that was before mandatory cancellations. We just were sort of realizing, and hearing the reports about how it was spreading so quickly, and people didn't know what to do. And again, we're always about the health and well-being of our teachers. And so we made the choice to go ahead and cancel it based on the information that we had at the time, which was the right choice to make, considering everything that happened after that. And then, one of the if you look at silver linings that came out of COVID for that first couple weeks, because we all thought it was temporary, right? We thought, oh, the schools are going to be closed for 2 weeks. We'll get it under control. Teachers scrambled and made it work with 24 hours, 48 hours notice. And the sort of response was I think community, especially parents, saw the positive impact that teachers and schools had on their children. I can remember all of the social media of, oh my gosh, my kid is driving me crazy. How do teachers do it? And holy cow, this is insane. Teachers are superheroes. Why do we not pay them enough? And, all of that. And so, in our minds as teachers, we were like, not this is fantastic, because a global pandemic is never fantastic, but people are starting to see what it's like to be a teacher. And so that, like, if you can look for a silver lining at the time, that was a really positive situation to come out professionally. But then as it ended up being, well, we're going to end the school year virtual and into the summer, COVID started getting political. And that's the piece that really, I think, hurt, is that it became a political issue that should have never been political. Like I talk about, education is not political. It should be nonpartisan. Everybody should care about kids and their well-being. And so when COVID became political, and then when it became no kids have got to be in schools, or, vaccines are bad, or all the things that made it political, it really hurt teaching in public schools, because that's when communities, that's when media, that's when, I say talking heads with opinions, really jumped in and started saying, no, teachers don't want to work. Teachers need to be back in the classrooms and all of that. And so that year was hard in a lot of ways. I say hands down, I'm in my 25th year of teaching, and that COVID year was by far the hardest that I've ever had. And I talk about now, if you weren't in the classroom when COVID hit, you have no idea what teaching is like, because we're still recovering from it. We'll be recovering for the next 12 years in terms of that cycle. And I think that really not only put an immediate stop to any movement, because you had teachers are concerned about their own well-being, the well-being of their family and their children. And we lost teachers died through it.
Yeah.
And your own health and well-being and your own family take precedent over any advocacy work you do. And so, the COVID pandemic hurt, but what made it hurt so much was that political rhetoric around
Yeah.
it.
Absolutely. And what's really discouraging is also this sort of, looking at it now, and forgetting sort of what we were going through at the time, like prior to vaccines, this push to get people back in schools before a vaccine even existed, and no seeming empathy for the idea that there were teachers who were immunocompromised or were going home to somebody who was immunocompromised. No seeming sympathy around this idea that you're sending people back without any protection around thousands, hundreds or thousands of other human beings that could potentially make this whole pandemic worse. And nobody knew for sure exactly. Nobody had all of the crystal ball answers at the time. So I think a lot of people, a lot of parents, a lot of teachers were saying, look, we don't know, so let's err on the side of saving human lives. Let's making sure people are safe. Don't die from this.
Right.
And yet you can go back in time and say, well, we should have gone back earlier, or this or that. But it's like everybody wants to play this game as though they had the crystal ball back in 2020 or 21, and they didn't. And like you and I was, I was working at a school in 2020, and we had, they tried to go back early, and two of the teachers wound up in the hospital before the school year even started.
Yeah. Well, I
So,
remember during that summer when they were going back and forth. I remember, it was all the talk of, well, children aren't getting COVID. Children aren't getting COVID. It's happening, it's happening to older people. It's happening to immunocompromised. It's happening. And, I am not a medical doctor, but the children
right,
weren't getting COVID because we were in isolation, right? We'd removed that, like we shut down the schools, right? So families weren't around other people. And so, that we were like, how can you say that children don't get it when they haven't been, or they shouldn't have been in situations where they were exposed to it? And we
right,
learned very quickly, I was fortunate to be in a school district that started out all virtual.
yeah,
But the schools that went back face to face, those numbers escalated very, very quickly. And
right,
so, and the other piece of it is going back to, science it's testing hypotheses, right? And
right,
so once you should be making adjustments as you gain more and more information.
right,
And again, I think because it was politicized, we weren't making the adjustments. People were not getting the correct, accurate information.
right.
And they, it just made things much worse.
Right. And of course that continued to happen on up into your first run here in 2022. You made this decision to run for superintendent of education. And of course, not only was COVID an issue, but there was the whole CRT narrative. And it seems to me what sometimes the other side does, or not sometimes, a lot of times, is they create these narratives, whether it's like they're eating cats and dogs, or there's litter boxes in the schools, or there's CRT, or whatever it is. They're making up these things, and then it's really hard to be on the defense around that. You're trying to defend essentially ghosts that don't exist, but you can't prove something. It's hard to prove a negative. It's hard to say. I mean, you would hope that people would have the common sense to look these things up and come to the right conclusion. But once a narrative sort of takes root, and it's also reinforced by the media, by members of the media, and then it spreads across social media like wildfire, and we're still at that time, and still now even, sort of learning how to critically use social media without just believing everything that's coming across, from seemingly, reputable people, or because it's in black and white, we're going to believe it. I imagine that made your run in 2022 really complicated and difficult. I'd like you to talk about that first run. What were some of your greatest challenges? What were some of your successes? Um, and what are your reflections on that run that in 2022?
Yeah, Todd, those are great comments to make. I actually just finished reading a book over a break called Democracy Awakening by Heather Cox Richardson. And she talks about, and it's fantastic. It's hard to read in terms of just like I had to set it down and process and all of that. But she talks about, the rhetoric that is used. And it kept reminding me of a dear friend that I taught with. She was the guidance counselor at Fairfield Middle. When we would talk about, things, and she'd say, well, we're chasing ghosts. And what she meant was we're trying to solve problems that don't exist.
Right.
And that is sort of what I felt coming out of COVID. The CRT, the parents need to decide. I felt the book banning. All of that was working to dismantle public education. Like if you look at, who's behind it, what the end goal is, it's for the general public to lose faith in public schools, right?
Mhm.
Because if you follow the money, who makes the money off of public schools failing? Charter schools, private schools, educational software companies who, say, oh, the kids aren't reading at a certain grade level, buy this software and, that sort of thing. And so that is where I think but our campaign struggled because we were having to combat ghosts. We were having to combat issues that do not and did not exist in public schools. And
Right.
instead of being able to go out and talk about what my platform was, what I stood for, what I wanted to happen, I was having to answer well, what do you think about CRT? What do you think
Right.
about book bannings? What do you think about SEL,
Right.
social emotional learning? And so I felt like it was on the defensive.
Yeah.
More than that. And when I was able to have those conversations and answer those questions, it was great because people understood. And when I was able to dialogue in person with people and say, what are your big issues? We found that common ground. We
Right.
were able to come to a sort of a situation where it's like, oh, okay, well, that makes sense. I get that. But you can't have those conversations with 5 million people, 5 million South
Yeah.
Carolinians, right?
Right.
And
Right.
so, part of that was we did the best we could with the time and the tools that we had to try and get out to as many people as possible. But we were fighting an uphill battle in terms of the rhetoric, in terms of the fact that when you look at eligible voters, half of our eligible voters don't vote.
Yeah.
When you look at the straight ticket voting in terms of, those sort of things, when people just go and pull straight ticket, and then also the fact that we now sort of live in a society where their identity tends to be like the party they vote for. And
Right.
that to me, I personally have never understood, because it's the candidate. I would look and see who the best candidate was, but I can't tell you how many parades I was in where somebody would say, well, I can't vote for you, I'm a Republican.
Yeah.
And I would want to stop and say, like, have that conversation, but you can't stop in a parade.
Right.
And so, I think as a society, we've got to somehow, and this is way out of the realm of superintendent of education, but as citizens of a democratic society, we've got to get away from just parties and that rhetoric and all of that, and really think about what our values as individuals are and find the candidates that support those values. I can't understand the number of public school teachers who vote against their own
Right.
best interest. Like that's,
Yes. Yeah.
a second piece of it. And
Absolutely.
trying to explain that, what, like if you look at what a candidate says, but then if they've been in office and you look at their voting record, it says the complete opposite in South Carolina, because we are currently a Republican supermajority. And,
Right.
You can talk about, oh, they've increased starting salaries for teachers, 48%, I think was the statistic since 2018-19. And I laughed out loud because guess what started in 2018? SC for Ed.
Right.
Guess what happened in 2019? 10,000 teachers and education supporters showed up on the State House.
Right.
So I think that lots of lessons learned from the first campaign. I'm really proud of the campaign we ran. I'm really proud because I said, if nothing else, at least we can try and get a different narrative out there, because I think our public schools in South Carolina are very successful. I think teachers work their butts off every day with the tools that they have to meet the needs of our students.
Right.
I think the metrics that we are judged by are not fair or accurate. I think, that piece of it is where the systems can change. And as superintendent of education, that's the level that I can work to change that narrative.
Yeah. It seems that candidates like you who want to stick to the issues and really talk about, what's really happened, what's happening, what you'd like to see happen, grounded in facts, grounded in policy. The problem, and I don't remember what podcast I was listening to, but somebody else was saying that the issue is that when you have an opponent who's willing to tap into human beings' limbic systems with fear-based rhetoric, that fear-based stuff about they're going to CRT, or they're going to indoctrinate your kids, or they're trying to bring Marxism. They use these sort of buzzwords that are very sort of volatile and make people react. And then when you can't really, when it's so hard once that fear takes root to undo that over the course of a campaign, because like you only have so much time, so many resources to get the message out, and you're wanting to stay on the message of, hey, let's increase teacher pay, let's do this for kids, you're wanting to stay on the pragmatic stuff that actually is going to matter, and yet you're being pulled into this other sort of discussion that is about fictional BS. It's but then you can't dismiss it because you have all these people who are going around with their limbic systems tapped into by this rhetoric, who are going to then go vote based upon those fears that they have that Lisa Ellis is going to turn their kids into a socialist or whatever. So can you, like, as you approach 2026, before I ask that question, just let me put a pin in the 2026 thing. I do want to just have one last question, and feel free to say no comment on this. I'm just curious, was there ever a time, because at that time in 2022, you have Kathy Maness and Ellen Weaver running, and a lot of people were seeing like, okay, realistically, it's going to be a Republican, not a Democrat. I mean, in South Carolina, I think a lot of people, that was their thought process. So they're like, okay, well, Kathy is more of a moderate, and Ellen Weaver seems more of like the MAGA sort of far right type person. So why don't we just throw everything behind Kathy? Was there ever any pressure put on you to do that, to drop out and support Kathy?
Yes.
Okay. Do you want to comment on that further, or you're good with just the yes?
I don't, but yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
I was just curious about that.
In terms of that, yes, there was pressure, and I again have reflected. I as teachers, we're natural reflectors on what can we do better, and I've reflected a lot on how that potentially impacted the fact that Ellen Weaver was eventually elected, and the impact that has had. I will say this: I think out of all of the candidates, I believe that I was the best candidate because I was still in schools. And so I was still dealing with the direct impact of bad policy and bad systems and slow to move change. And so I truly felt that I could get into that role and in 4 years could at least be getting the right questions asked and changed out of all of those candidates.
Okay, fair enough. So let's go into 2026. As we look forward to 2026, you know that there's going to be whoever the Democratic nominee is going to face a similar type of rhetoric. If you are the nominee and presumably running against Ellen, how would you do things differently this time? How would you manage those types of whatever narratives they're going to come up with? How would you manage that differently?
I think there's a couple things that are different with 2026, and I'll talk about those things first, and then I'll sort of talk about what our plan, my plan is.
Yeah.
I think that people, when you compared the qualifications of what I brought to the table versus what Ellen brought to the table, and I'm talking about 2022. I think people who had concern about it just assumed that the better qualified candidate was going to win, that people were going to see, oh, Lisa didn't cheat to get her master's. She, is not like, she's a teacher. She has the experience, like all of those things. And so I think people thought, oh, well, this is taken care of because people are going to choose the better candidate. And that's where the straight ticket hurt, because people didn't care who was the better candidate. They cared about the R or the D behind their name.
Right.
So I think that woke people up a little bit. I think that people who either didn't vote, who were maybe educators, or people who have children but didn't think that it was that big of a deal, are now awake and are paying attention to the race this time. I think the second piece of it is, even though I said this is her platform, this is what she's all about, she was untested, right? So now we're 3 years into her term, and she has done everything that she said she was going to do. Right. And so now there's that platform of what she has actually accomplished, that I can say, well, here's what has happened in the 3 years. This is why this is not good for education. This is why I'm the better candidate. So I think those things have changed. Again, while I breathe, I hope, right? I hope that people are waking up. And I think people who thought that maybe now are waking up and they're like, no, I gotta get out and talk to people about this race. Mm-hmm. I've got to talk to my family and friends. I've got to, talk to my teachers and coworkers at school to make sure that they're voting in their own best interest. So I think some of our public has been awakened.
One of the issues that you had share on your website, which is a big passion of mine, is this voucher thing, which unfortunately has been successful. They've been trying for many, many years to get these vouchers passed and essentially funnel public funds to private schools. Can you just share, like, if you were elected, what would be your approach to trying to undo that or to change that?
Well, I think that it's a great question. And again, I have had to do deep dives into funding and all of that. And I'm still learning every day about it. How the funding is done, the superintendent of education can influence it, but ultimately that's up to the state legislature. Right. My frustration, is that any sort of voucher system is passing and more are coming out of the woodworks. Mm-hmm. The second piece of it is the legislation that is passing. They say, oh, these will help students in poverty. These will help, students. But when you look at what the poverty index for the law is, and it's 400% above the poverty line,
Yeah.
That's not helping. Like that's, helping homes that grows 200, 300, $400,000, right? That's
Right.
not a home in poverty.
Right.
But the third thing that I think lately has come out that really sends me over the edge is number one, public money shouldn't be used in private situations. But the fact that charter schools, that private schools are not held to the same transparency and accountability is where I have grave concerns. And I think that if an entity is taking public funding, public money, my tax money, then they need to be transparent and accountable in how that money is spent. And I think it came out, time is weird with me still with COVID, but it came out in the fall about the public charter system in the Limestone and Erskine, and they don't have to disclose their not funding. What's the word I'm looking for? Who they're in bed with, for lack of a better word. Like that to me is a red flag because public schools have to be transparent in all of their public funding. And so I would be curious, and Todd, I don't know the answer to this, but I would learn it immediately. But I would be curious into what as superintendent, what parameters I could put on that voucher money that would make that money a little bit more transparent, those who's receiving that money more accountable, so that we know if we can't move that voucher money back into public funding, at least we know it's money being spent appropriately and in the best interest of the child. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it makes total sense.
Okay.
One of the things that I've struggled with is there is this sense that, okay, if we're going to give money to non-traditional public schools, that they should have to be tested, and then that's how we hold them accountable. In my mind, that reinforces the sort of test and punish paradigm, and I find that to be an awkward place to be, because yes, I want them held accountable, but I don't like the current accountability system that public schools have to endure. So how do you thread that needle of saying, yes, we want to hold them accountable, but we also want to transform the accountability system of public schools so that it's not just based on a bubble and test?
Right, absolutely. And I think that there's a couple things, like let's just set the testing piece aside for just a second. But in terms of, transparency and accountability, charter schools and, private schools, parochial schools, they have a lot more flexibility in how they can spend their money also. And so to me, that's a piece that you can immediately look at in terms of public schools, right? So if you're talking about, and I think about Senator Hembree several years ago with the schools of innovation, and the Department of Ed created this where a school or a school district could apply to be a school of innovation, and they would be relieved of some of the hoops that public schools have to jump through to help them be successful. And so my question was, okay, well, if we know that these laws, these policies are hurting public schools and being successful, then why don't we just repeal these policies, right? So that way every public school has that same opportunity. Why do I have to, as Lisa Ellis Public School, apply for the School of Innovation to be waived out of this law if it hurts schools and kids? And nobody could ever really say, oh, that makes sense.
It's almost like they're saying, yeah, well, you can't, we're going to hold you to this bubble and test unless you want to innovate. That's like, it doesn't make any sense. It's like, why wouldn't we all want to be encouraged to continue innovating, not just say we're going to have a special group of people to innovate? It's like every school should have the capacity to innovate.
Like those sort of things. And so I think that sort of comes back to that accountability and transparency piece, because charter schools, private schools, parochial schools have more flexibility in their spending. They have the potential to have greater gains and whatever metrics they're using. My thing is, if that's working in those settings, why can that not also allow public schools to do
Right.
that? And so part of
Exactly.
me, I think, in solving the transparency, accountability, funding piece is looking at those same policies that those schools don't have to follow and pulling them back. Because also, Todd, I mean, you've been in education.
Yeah.
We're working with the same laws that were created
Yeah.
in 1976, 1982,
Right.
1990,
Right.
the Act 388 in 2000 whatever. And but we're in 2026 in a
Yeah.
very different school system that has changed for many years, but COVID really upended and in the way we're doing. And we're preparing kids, or we should be preparing kids, for jobs that don't even exist yet, but we're still using a 19th century, which my students will tell you is we're old because we're in the last century. We're
Right.
still using that system. And so to me, as superintendent of education, there's other ways to address that without having to say, oh, we need more or less funding. Does that
Right.
make sense?
It makes total sense. And,
Okay.
A Nation at Risk came out, 45 years ago, and we've been trying to do this accountability system through doubling down almost constantly on standardized testing, and really under No Child Left Behind, like putting it on steroids, and Race to the Top put it on more steroids. So it's been both types of. It's not even just been one party. It's been both parties kind of doubling down on this idea that the only way to improve education is to test more and to put more emphasis on the test. And then the schools work themselves in a way to do that. And then we wonder why teachers are leaving the profession, because they don't, and why students are dropping out and don't, and seem like they're, at best, they're just jumping through the hoops to comply with
Absolutely.
the system.
And I would argue, not argue, but I would also add that, you're talking about a nation at risk, but you're talking about No Child Left Behind was 2000, 2001.
Yeah.
So now we've been through 2 K through 12 cycles where I would argue that it has actually been detrimental to our
Right.
students, in terms of because we have turned everything into preparing for a test to the point where we have completely ignored the science behind how children learn.
Right.
And so, I think about, and I'm a Gen Xer, I think about my kindergarten, my elementary school experience, but I remember kindergarten with stations. I remember reading,
Yeah.
I remember play,
Recess,
recess,
Yeah.
all of that,
Yeah.
language, that's how we learned. And I think about, now you walk into I don't know so much about kindergarten, but a first grade classroom, and kids are in rows and desks and
Yeah.
sitting there and all of that. And that's not how kids that age learn. And because we're so focused on testing, and we're spending so much time during the year testing, because we're doing the pre-test, we're doing the benchmarks, we're doing the test, we're doing the post-test, all of that, we're taking away time for the kids to learn and absorb the information, use the information, which is how you actually retain it.
Right.
So we've moved completely away from having kids learn to where they're going to be better. And because of that, we are creating a society that just listens to talking heads and doesn't stop and think, oh, that doesn't really make sense.
I've heard from so many early childhood educators in particular feel like they're almost forced to commit sort of a malpractice with kids, because especially the veterans who remember the time when they had the stations and the recess, and the kids were 5-year-olds were allowed to be 5-year-olds.
Absolutely.
And instead, it seemed like with No Child Left Behind, what we started to do is take what used to be in second grade, move it down to kindergarten. And we did that all the way sort of up through, to where now kids are graduating high school with like 2 or 3 years of college credit, which is great to save money on tuition. But it's like, you're not allowing kids to have a sort of a natural flow of time. You just said, we've got to shift everything downward. And then you ask yourself, well, why? Why are we in such a rush? Why are we in a race to the top? Why do we have to rush kids through their childhood? They only get one chance to be 4 years old to 18 years old, and we're wanting them to rush through it for who? Like that's the question I keep asking is for whom? Like why are we doing this to kids, stealing their childhoods so that somebody in a district office can pat themselves on the back when the scores go up 10%? Like I don't I like I, but then we worry about, going back to the COVID thing, the mental health of kids, right? We worry about that, like them missing, not being in school, and the mental health issues that resulted from that. But we don't talk about the mental health issues that result from this overemphasis on testing and like the taking away of recess and other things that make them physically and mentally healthy. We don't talk about that. We just no, it's all about the test scores, because that's what your report card that's going to be in the paper is based upon. So that's all the people seem to care about. And
Yeah,
it's frustrating.
and it absolutely is. And I obviously I'm in a position where I'm putting myself out there again, to run for this office. And so I'm to the point where I'm not afraid to speak on the issues, and all of that. I can't understand, and this is where I struggle, as a teacher, is I can't understand why the school districts in South Carolina have not banded together and said, this report card is terrible and has been terrible for as many years that it has been. Yes. We are going to do our first priority is to do right by our children. And so we are going to do right by our children. We are going to do what we know scientifically and through research-based educational practices, what is best for children at the first grade level, at the second grade level, all the way up to the 12th grade level. We're more than likely going to take a hit on the report card, but that's because this report card data is biased in pick a piece of it, right? Because you can hit all of the different areas where it is not tracking the best data for schools. Yeah. And if everybody would do that, and I cannot figure out why that's not happening. A good friend says the system's working for somebody.
Right. I have a theory about that. It's because the people who are succeeding want to celebrate that to the public. So the school districts that are already like well-resourced and doing well, they want to celebrate that. They want to say, we won the blue ribbon. We're doing great, to reinforce the idea doing a great job. And what that does is just reinforces credibility into the system. But
it's a fake system. It's a fake system.
It is. But when an under-resourced school district fails, though, then they look like they're whining about something. They're going to say, oh, they don't like being held accountable. They're just making excuses. So it's going to take leadership from the districts and the schools that are doing well to say, we reject all of this. We don't want a report card. Yeah, we got an A or we got whatever. We exceeded whatever, but we reject that, and we don't accept it. That's what it's going to take. We don't accept the blue ribbon. We don't accept any of that.
Right. But also, wouldn't it be great for that district leadership to have a superintendent of education who supported and said from the highest position in public education in South Carolina?
Yes.
Supported that?
That would be amazing.
And was supporting that narrative?
That would be amazing.
That's me. That's me.
Well, Lisa, we have Edith Alston asked this question, and I know we're running out of time. She said, can you speak to the disparity in resources and the lack thereof in the Black and Hispanic communities? What are your plans to address the issue of lack of funding for special education? So if you want to take a stab at
absolutely. And those are both questions, and I will try to be brief, but again, education is a spider web of all these things are attached to each other. I definitely think, there's still an inequity of funding among schools. in South Carolina, particularly with Act 388 happening, decades ago. And then public school districts having to depend on, 25% of their funding from local revenue. And so somehow we've got to work on a formula and again, influence the legislature to look at how we can get money into those districts that need it, that don't have the infrastructure, the businesses, all of that for that local funding. The second piece of it is sort of what I spoke to earlier about the funding, is that the Department of Education has to really reevaluate the funding streams and
Right.
where those are going, and if they're still viable in 2026 public education. I use the textbook situation as an issue. When again, Gen X, back in the 19th century, when I was in school, we used textbooks because we didn't have the internet, right? I mean, it was slowly coming on, but we used textbooks, and then we had the library, right? Encyclopedias. And so that's where you got your information. Well, now everybody who, should be of a certain age is walking around with the entire knowledge system that we know in their hand. So do we really need to be spending millions, tens of millions of dollars on textbooks that tend to be outdated information, right?
Yeah.
And or have a bias to them. If we're
Right.
gonna, branch out into the, who gets to write the narrative and CRT and all of that, that's coming from a bias. And so I can say, as an English teacher, I didn't use the textbook. I used it very little because I spent the time resourcing other materials. And I think, if we can allow teachers that flexibility, and give them that opportunity, they know their students, they're going to be able to engage them more. But that's a revenue stream that maybe we can allocate somewhere else. I also really believe in local control, because a Greenville County school district that has a lot of money in local revenue has different needs than a school district in Jasper, right? Or, a Dorchester 4. And so I think there needs to be that local flexibility where Greenville has the money, or Charleston or Richland 2 has the money that they can spend on their needs, but they're not pigeonholed into they have to spend it this way. Same with Dorchester 4. They have this pot of money. Their student needs are this, and they should be able to spend that money to meet their students' needs, because we're not dealing with widgets. We're not dealing with blueberries. We're dealing with individual students, and every single student that walks into that school door every day has their own set of issues that teacher is expected to address every day. And that's not always academic. You talked about social and emotional. You talked about, when we talk about, different perspectives, right? You talk about your minority communities. Like, everybody's coming with their own set of issues, and the public school accepts them all and has to have the tools in order to be able to take them where they are and move them into where they want to be. And I think that comes with looking at policies that are decades old at the Department of Ed level and influencing policies at the state level to make those changes. So we're meeting the needs of 2026 students.
And I think if we could just break out of some of the partisanship, there is some low-hanging fruit that we all agree with. I think I don't really know anybody who's like, yeah, we test kids just enough. If not, we should test them more. Like, there's so many little things like that aren't partisan, that if we could just get past the BS conversations and just talk about compensating teachers, about, like preparing kids for the future with AI in mind and the technologies that are coming on in mind. And, and how can we save the taxpayers money? How do we
Absolutely
hold people accountable in a way that doesn't get them to teach to the test. I mean, those things aren't necessarily partisan. And I think if we could just get to sit down and have a conversation with people and move past that, we could really get things done. I want to thank you for your time, Lisa. And I do want to share with folks. I hate that we're out of time and maybe we need to do another one of these. But I put your website down here. I always get my finger wrong because I mirror it wrong. So it's ellisforsc.com right there. That's the website. So folks who want to learn more about Lisa's campaign, if you want to donate, if you want to get involved, go to ellisforsc.com. You can learn more there. I want to thank you, Lisa. Thank you for years of leadership and your courage, because I know that when you put yourself out there, no matter what you say, you're going to get hit. You know, you're putting yourself into an arena where you're going to get hit from all these different angles, and it takes a lot of courage to have done that for years, and then to step up and do it again. So I really applaud that and thank you for it.
Todd, thank you so much. That means a lot. Thank you.
All right, everybody, that is Lisa Ellis. Thanks so much for her time tonight. Thank you for tuning in. I want to thank everybody who checked in. We had Joyce and Beth and Cindy and Edith, lots of other people who tuned in, and thank you for your comments. And you can continue to comment and reach out to Lisa if you have any questions about her campaign. If there's something that we didn't cover, we'll hopefully try to get her and Sylvia back on. Maybe we can get it back on together to have a conversation, but we have a long way to go before the primaries, but it'll be here before we know it. So we wanted you to start hearing from the candidates and start thinking about who you wanted to support. So we had Sylvia on, we had Lisa on. I've invited Ellen Weaver to come on the program. If anybody else declares their candidacy for this position, we'll certainly invite them. And Ellen, if you're watching, love to have a conversation with you. Hopefully learn a little bit more from each other. And again, if you're interested in supporting Lisa, it's Ellis for SC.com. I do want to publicize a couple of things. One is, if you are on Instagram, you can follow the SCEA. You can go over there and just go do a search for the SCEA, or you can go to Instagram.com/the_SCEA_. That's the direct link to our Instagram account. And our TikTok is just tiktok.com/@the_SCEA. And you can follow us there. There's a lot of content that isn't on our Facebook page. And if you're watching this, you're either watching this on Facebook or YouTube. There's a lot of content not on Facebook or YouTube being produced by folks like Pete Stone, Alex Del Castillo. That stuff is over there on those platforms. So we want to encourage everybody to connect with us and join us over there. And a couple of other things. We have a live stream coming up in 2 weeks. So January 21st at 6 o'clock, we're going to have Blake Easter. He's going to be talking about a program called Traffic Proof SC, which is not a typical top. Reached out, and I felt like this was something that would be really interesting for us to talk about, how educators and community members can help traffic proof South Carolina. So young people are and everybody. Thanks so much again to Lisa for showing up, and for those of you who need support. Cool offers free online one-to-one support induction teachers. You do not need to be a member of the SCEA. Of course, we'd love you to join. But if you're not a member, you can still join us every Tuesday and Thursday night. These three wonderful people, veteran educators, are there online ready to support you as from 6 to 8 o'clock. You do not have to come on for 2 hours. You can join them at any time during that window, 6 to 8, at cool.us or cool.us/coaching. You just go there, click the link. You're put into a Zoom room with one of these three folks. You can ask questions, ask for advice. You can vent. You can, seek guidance and advice, and they are really happy to help folks. So if you know anybody who's in the first 5 years of their profession here in a public school in South Carolina, make sure they're aware of this resource. And I mentioned Alex before. Alex does Cool Yoga, and he does these mindful moments and Wellness Wednesdays, and all that can be found over on our TikTok and Instagram channel. So make sure you check out Alex's work over there Really, really cool stuff. And I want to thank Alex and also thank Pete. Thank Steve Newsom for all the writing that he's done. If you haven't been to our website at cool.us, you go there and check out the views. It's a blog. Incredible writing from Steve Newsom, who is also affiliated with SC for Ed and has been doing some wonderful writing for Cool. And we appreciate that. Really in-depth research, really interesting articles. We ask you to read it, share that information, share those articles with folks that you know who are interested in that kind of content. So if the live stream isn't necessarily your thing, you're more of a reader, we have that blog that Steve produces there. So again, thanks so much to Lisa Ellis. Thank you for tuning in. We wish everybody a happy new year and a great start to this 2026. It's going to be an important year. If you're not registered to vote, we want to encourage everybody who's listening to get registered to vote. We want you to be informed. We want you to go out there and participate in your democracy. I think we see how important that is and the impacts of when we don't participate. And we think that sometimes our vote doesn't count. But that type of mentality is what prevents us from voting in some really great candidates. So we all need to have hope. We all need to do our part. And if you lose, at least you can say, I did my part. It's really important for you to support the candidates that you think will do the best job leading us, and to make sure you're registered to vote and get out there and vote. So again, thanks to Lisa Ellis. Thank you. And we'll see you on the next live stream on January 21st, 6 o'clock. Until then, have a wonderful week.